This is part of a project, a collaboration between Cavan Arts Office and Cavan County Library Service to just raise awareness of our beautiful, fantastic historical surroundings, particularly Knockbride, of which the Corleck head is a very important part. It started off, we had a meeting in December with Katrina, the arts officer, and Katrina's here today. She wouldn't come up here tonight. She put all the duty to me. We had a workshop with Noel Monaghan, the poet, our renowned local poet who is also here. He conducted a workshop, creative writing workshop, of which we will see the results later on in the year. I'm delighted tonight to welcome my colleague, Jonathan. Jonathan and I have worked together for many, many years. Jonathan first gave a lecture here in 2010, is that right? For Bealtaine 400, and he gave a talk on Tom Barron. That led him to research and write his book, this here gentleman and scholar on Tom Barron, which was published in 2012 and launched here to a packed house in 2012 in June. Tom Barron, it's apt that Jonathan is the author of this book and that he's also giving the lecture, because Tom Barron he recognised the Corleck head as an important historical artefact, and he mediated with the halls of �値𝗍𝗃 and convinced them to get the Corleck head into the National Museum of Ireland, where it stands at the moment. There's also an excellent replica in our museum, local museum in Bealtaine, if anybody would like to go and see it. Also, there are a few copies of Jonathan's book. I think he brought a few copies with him. If anybody didn't manage to get it, they'd like to buy it, he's doing a great discount. So it's fantastic to see such a big crowd here. I knew we would get a good crowd, but I didn't realise we'd have such the interest that we have. I'm delighted to see you all, and I'll pass you over to Jonathan now.
Good evening and welcome. Again, that is a lovely painting and very, very apt that it should be here tonight. I just have to excuse the psychedelic slides. maybe somehow in keeping with ancient warriors, and that I don't know, but just before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the work that was carried out by Tom Barron, who was for many decades personally researched and explored East Cavan's ancient history. Ultimately, this talk aims to perpetuate his enthusiasm for the subject. And regarding his own research, Tom Barron stated, "I can claim to be very fortunate in that fate has dealt to me many valuable clues which help me to understand our ancient history. Echoes from the past have spoken to me by way of folk tradition and the mysterious artifacts which surface from time to time. As well, there are many forts on our landscape in which dwelt important people, long forgotten, some of them kings of Ireland. The terrain of East Cavan has therefore been to me a most significant document." Tonight we'll delve a little into the mysterious, if not somewhat enigmatic world of the ancient past. The Corleck head, of which we'll be speaking, is a fine example of an early Iron Age Celtic tricephalus. We'll now take a brief look at the Celts, and although I suppose they were a nomadic people, the Celts may be viewed as an important civilization that hailed from Central Europe, and their name was based on their spoken language. And the map, I know it's a bit wobbly, but the Central Europe, 400 BC, the Celts spread out to the Britannic Isles of Ireland and Britain, 500 BC, and into Iberia, 600 BC, which is modern-day Spain. In a European cultural context, Professor George Dumézil spoke of three free classes in Celtic society. They were the Druid, the warrior, and the farmer. Having drawn comparisons with the with the caste system of Indian society, the professor noted that the first class was represented by the Druids, who took care of the sacred, dealing with the law, cult, and magic, while ensuring that a king exercised his sovereignty in accordance with the gods. Class 2 was the warrior who dealt with matters through the use of force, both in war and the protection of the community. And included in Class 3 was farming, growing of crops, and human fertility. Therefore, when nature worked in harmony, society could be considered to be at peace. An important aspect of Celtic civilization was its artistic expression. The Corleck head was carved in a style known as the 𝗲𝗏 style. The term was derived from a geographical location called 𝗲𝗏 in Switzerland, where in 1857 the Swiss archaeologist Hans Kopp discovered an impressive hoard of Celtic artefacts at 𝗲𝗏 on the northeastern shores of Lake Neuchâtel. 𝗲𝗏 art dates to the 5th century BC, and during the late Iron Age period was easily recognized by its spiral and circular imagery, as you've got some circular imagery in the painting here. And it was distinctive to the earlier Hallstatt style, which was discovered in 1846 on the west banks of Lake Hallstatt in Austria. The Hallstatt art form dated into two categories, firstly around 1100 BC and then 1000 BC. And secondly, from 800 BC to 700 BC. Its art form is generally geometrical in design and can culturally be termed as late Bronze Age to early Iron Age. The 𝗘𝘀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃 stone in West Cavan is a fine example of a stone with 𝗲𝗏 design, with the circles. When the Celts encountered Greek and Roman civilizations, they were inevitably exposed to alternative art forms. In 390 BC, the Celts daringly sacked Rome, and in 290 BC, they attacked the Greek sanctuary at Delphi, and these battles placed them in direct confrontation with the emerging classical world. In the centuries which followed, archaeological discoveries would reveal that the Celts were not only skilled in craft work, but they were also wealthy, as can be observed by their ceremonial torques and jewellery. From 58 BC, Julius Caesar began a campaign which led to the complete annexation of the once Celtic stronghold that stretched across Europe. By 31 BC, the Romans' relentless advance and the dominance of the Roman Empire had the effect of pushing the Celts to the very edges of Western Europe. Ireland, being geographically on the fringe of Western Europe, would become one of the last surviving centres of Celtic culture and power. The history of an area can be explored through its topography, place names, archaeology, literature and oral tradition. In the parish of Knockbride, the townlands of Corleck and Drumage are positioned amongst a range of hills which run through Virginia towards Cootehill, and they're collectively referred to as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗖𝗃𝗃𝗃, that is the hill of the three gods. The name 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗖𝗃𝗃𝗃 is believed to have been a reference to the three gods of craftsmanship, which we'll look at shortly. Hogan's Amnasticon tells us that the term 𝗧𝗵 indicates a mountain, hill or heathland. The range known as 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗖𝗃𝗃𝗃 also forms a part of a hill range known as 𝗧𝗵𝗃, that is the hill of the generous cow goddess, alias 𝗧𝗵𝗃 𝗏𝗃, which belonged to the Gillenga tribe. They were a tribe who inhabited the baronies of Castlerahan, Clan Key and possibly Tullygarvey. And cow worship would appear to have been quite common in Celtic Ireland. Further south in County Meath, you have Brúna Báine, which means the other world of the cow goddess. And cow worship was also prevalent in countries such as Egypt, where the cow was worshipped as the goddess Hathor. Incidentally, I suppose it would appear that there were more than a passing connection between early Egyptian culture and Celtic Ireland. The discovery of the 𝗲𝗵𝗲 𝗖𝗃𝗃 with its use of papyrus-lined cover confirms that links were established with Egypt. In East Cavan, evidence points to the parish of 𝗏𝗏 as having been a place of importance in pre-Christian Breifne. Evidence in terms of place names and antiquity would include the parish name itself, 𝗏𝗏, that is Bride's Hill, the lost Bridget stone, an artefact, the dismantled mound with its cruciform chamber on Corleck Hill, the so-named Corleck idol with its associated deities, and many other artefacts which provide us with a compelling picture of Cavan's ancient past. The aforementioned Corleck Hill in 𝗏𝗏 is situated along the watershed that exists between the Boyne River and the River Erne. On the highest part of Corleck Hill, which in the parish of 𝗏𝗏, as I said, there was a large mound with a stone-lined passage, and this led to a cruciform central chamber. Around the aforementioned mound, there had been until 1836 a large circle of flagstones, and there was an outlying stone which had a hole through it. Also, there was an additional embankment 70 yards in diameter which surrounded the mound. Having been completely quarried, the remaining embankment was finally levelled around 1900. This mound with its central chamber was undoubtedly a burial site when we consider similar examples at Knowth and Doubt. And it's interesting to mention that a Lughnasadh festival also took place for many years on Corleck Hill. In 1836, 28 acres of farmland in the neighbouring townland of 𝗏𝗏 came into the possession of a family by the name of Longmore. The land contained an enclosure, forts, and the remains of some type of ancient castle or cashel. In 1855, James Longmore Jr. began to add an upper level to his house. And during his search for building materials, around the old cashel, to the southern part of the farm, he discovered the so-named Corleck head and its corresponding 𝗏𝗏𝗏 idol, which is on the 𝗏𝗏 townland. Although retrieved in 𝗏𝗏, the three-faced idol was dubbed the Corleck head. And the reason for this possibly being the idol was displayed on a wall at Corleck School after its initial discovery in 1855. However, a 16th century record suggests that a portion of 𝗏𝗏 was known as, which was near the cashel, was also called Corlacca, which translates as Corleck. The Longmores later displayed the idols on a purpose-built wall beside their house. And it's interesting to note that the find location of the Corleck head lies within 12 miles distance of 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲, that is the Witches' Mountain, alias 𝗏𝗏 in County Meath. 𝗏𝗏 has one surviving cairn out of a total of 30 that were demolished for building material, and also as a means of expanding farmers' holdings, which was probably a delight to the landlord. Until 1865, the group of idols were said to have remained on the high wall at Longmore's, and in the same year, the Longmores sold the lease of the farm to Thomas Hall. It said that Mr. Hall's sons attempted to separate the idols, and in doing so, they accidentally smashed the ram's head. And the bearded head was later built into a barn at Nelson's farm at 𝗏𝗏𝗃, where it remained until its retrieval in 1969. The Halls placed the head on a pier, the Corleck head on a pier leading into their farmyard, where it remained for many years. In 1934, Tom Barron recorded that he'd become aware of the Corleck head, and on assessing the artefact, he reported it to the National Museum of Ireland. Thereby, he was bringing it to the world's attention. In 1935, Tom Barron interviewed John Riley, an 87-year-old man from Knockbride, who as a child remembered being lifted up to see the group of stone heads on the wall at the school, at Corleck School. And it was about the time they'd been discovered by the farmer. And James 𝗏𝗏 incidentally owned that school. The idols were, as I said, thereafter moved to the front of 𝗏𝗏's house until it was sold in 1865. And this is the image with the �𝗏𝗵𝗲 idol with the 𝗓𝗀 head, the ram's head, and the Corleck head, which was its three faces. And I'll just come back to it again later. The 𝗓𝗀 head, it's pierced of sort of a round hole in the ear, and there was a reason possibly for that, but we'll come back to that. This drawing by Bill Richards was based on a similar shrine discovered at 𝗏𝗏 in Yorkshire. In 1937, through Master Barron's mediation, the Hall family they permitted the National Museum of Ireland to keep the Corleck head on permanent loan. And in the same year, Dr. Adolf Maher, a former director of the National Museum, in a presidential speech to the Prehistoric Society of England, said that the Corleck head, he described as being certainly the most Gaulish-looking sculpture of religious character ever found in Ireland. This, I think, it's an important map because although we can't see it very well here, but Tom Barron put this map together and he identified all the important locations from his interviews with people in the 1930s. So he identifies where the Corleck head was found, where the 𝗏𝗏 idol was found, where the passage to the tomb was, where the cashel was. They're all on the map. I think that's a very important map because otherwise there's not always a lot of information to go on. In discussing the prominence of the tricephalic idols, A.T. Lucas wrote that three-faced heads are widely distributed over the world, particularly in India, the Near East and Europe. And it seems possible, he said, to date them from about 3000 BC. And in Mohenjo-daro in India, there were particular heads found there, and then up to the modern times. The three-faced heads in Europe would tend to fall into two main groups: a pagan group and of the Romano-Celtic period, and a Christian group dating from the Roman down to late medieval times, but chiefly to the Romanesque and Gothic periods. Tricephalic divinities appear to have been popular with the Celts and also to some extent with the Romans, while the Christian version generally was intended as a representation of the Trinity, was a practice that was not encouraged by the Church. Three-faced heads, which have been designated as pagan in character, have been unearthed mainly in the following locations: the rivers Marne and 𝗀𝗧 in the northeast of France and in Belgium, the Rhone Valley in the southeast of France, in Denmark, and also in Great Britain and Ireland. This artifact, called the 𝗬𝗏𝗃 head, was found in Jutland by two girls who were playing in a sand pit sometime between the years 1870 and 1880. And in 1955, a historian by the name of Knud Hogsborough Ostergaard, a Danish historian, wrote a paper on the 𝗬𝗏𝗃 head, which he drew references to the Corleck head. In Celtic society, the human head was perceived as being preeminent, a symbol of divinity and supernatural power. And in Bronze Age Europe, heads were viewed as sun symbols, while the carved head was symbolic of the whole warrior. At Ântremont in Provence, there's a lintel dating to the 3rd or 2nd century AD, which contained a carved human head, while the lintel also has two empty niches, which more than likely held embalmed human heads. Indeed, 20 decapitated human skulls were located at the 𝗬𝗵𝗲 site, and amongst the numerous stone carvings found at the site were 6 carved heads which contained a large hand grabbing the top of the head. A statue of the Celtic sanctuary of 𝗍𝗏, also located in Provence, depicts a creature gripping a human head. It's got a human head in each paw, while in a somewhat, I suppose, a gruesome manner, it's eating a human hand. Another Celtic sanctuary at 𝗏𝗏, dating to the 4th century BC, had a portico containing decapitated heads. These heads were all male and came from persons that were no more than 40 years of age. And the heads were most likely detached from defeated enemy warriors and retained as war trophies. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, who lived between 90 BC and 30 BC, said of the Celts, "When their enemies fall, they cut off their heads and fasten them about the necks of their horses and carry them off as booty, singing a paean over them and striking up a song of victory. The heads of their most distinguished enemies they embalm in cedar oil and carefully preserve in a chest, and these they exhibit to strangers." Not the kind of thing you'd want to exhibit to a stranger coming to your house. Helen Hickey notes that the customary removal of an enemy's head would also have been performed in Celtic Ireland. Many theories abound on the Corleck head itself, and we'll now consider some interpretations as to what the Corleck head may symbolise. One concept deduces that the artefact served as a representation of the god named Lugh, and it's appropriate to see some corn with the festival of Lunasa growing around the Corleck head there. Until 1831, a Lunasa festival was observed annually on Corleck Hill, usually on the last Sunday of July, first Sunday of August. This was a harvest gathering festival, and it's conceivable that the stone head would have been displayed on a pillar for the occasion. The stone idol may have been placed on a pillar to serve as a phallic symbol of strength and fertility. Each of the individual faces on the Corleck idol evoke a certain emotion, and who knows, like, they may have been employed in some form of decision-making or judgment by the Druids. So you've got a smiling, benign face, a neutral face, and an angry face.
Yeah.
Marie-Louise Saugestad, writing in her book Gods and Heroes of the Celts, provides an interesting description of a Celtic sanctuary which captures something, I think, of the ritualistic nature of the Celts. She states, "In the old solitude of the sacred woodland, that the Celtic tribe meets its gods, and its mythical world is a sacred foreshadow, pathless, unbounded, which is inhabited by mysterious powers. A world which is indeed our world, but pregnant with many other worlds. There are 2 camps, the camp of men and the other camp. In the other camp are the supernatural powers. There are 2 dominant types, the male type and the female type. The female type is that of the mother goddesses type, of seasonal feasts, animal goddesses, mothers and teachers, incarnation of natural forces of fertility or destruction." And the Corleck head itself may have been viewed as an incarnation of destruction, both destruction and fertility. In terms of destruction, a 15th century faience names Drumage as 𝗏𝗏, which could be translated as the Hill of Death. In 1989, an investigation by the National Museum of Ireland was being carried out into bog bodies, and records that turf cutters in Corleck Bog had discovered the skeleton of a tall man buried alongside a wooden wheel. The bogland at Corleck stretches into 𝗏𝗵𝗲, thus lending credence to 𝗏𝗵𝗲 having been at one time a Druidic sanctuary and hill of death. And local mythology speaks of the Druid of Corleck. However, the body, like in this particular instance, it may have been a reburial because bodies usually buried in peat normally don't decompose, they remain in a preserved condition. So on the other hand, if this was a hill of death, then could it be too great a leap of faith to suggest that an act of cannibalism may have taken place? I believe that further archaeological research into that area would prove useful. Bog bodies discovered in Ireland and Europe testify to the Celtic practice of human sacrifice. Irish examples of well-preserved bog bodies include Old Croghan from County Offaly and 𝗪𝗏𝗵𝗲 from County Meath. In the European context, you have Lindomos man from Britain and Tolland man from Denmark. All of these bog bodies were ritually sacrificed, having received the tripartite death by strangulation with a noose, bludgeoning by a hammer, and this is quite gruesome, and having their throat slashed before being thrown into a bog. And each of these individuals which were found, these bog bodies, they all appeared to have been persons of noble birth. They weren't accustomed to heavy work, and they were most likely Celtic kings. In particular, they were said to have incited they had incited the anger of their subjects. Maybe prosperity had decreased, or crops failed, or a plague had struck, and therefore it was the ruler that got the punishment, as it were. And so they were sacrificed. Large-scale examples of human sacrifice also occurred in continental Europe. Just out of interest, at 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 in Germany, they found a small village of about 100 people. This is going a little bit off, but they discovered that there was over 1,000 bones which had axe marks on them, and they come from some 250 miles from where those people were living. But just bearing in mind, this was predating, like this was going really early, Neolithic, and a lot of these people may have migrated with these as Celts into other countries like across Europe. The Celtic 𝗀𝗪𝗏 cauldron, which was retrieved in a bog, from a bog in Germany, contains images of kingship and sovereignty rituals, as well as references to human sacrifice. So each aspect of the triple death was in all probability an offering to specific gods. The Druids also worshipped gods. There was 3 gods of fertility, and these gods were 𝗖𝗃, a god that required that a victim be strangled; 𝗃𝗀𝗏, the god of thunder and rain, who demanded death by battering or fire; and 𝗪𝗏𝗄𝗏𝗃, a god who required that a victim be drowned in a liquid. And then you're kind of thinking about the 3 faces on the Corleck head. Could they have represented some of those gods? It makes it a little bit more scary, I think. So incidentally, human and animal sacrifices are also recorded in the annals of the Four Masters as having taken place in Cavan at 𝗪𝗏 𝗔𝘀𝗽𝗲. There was sacrifices to the corn god 𝗓𝗏𝗏. So if there was a bad crop failure, it wasn't a good place to be living there. Folklore also relates that Druids in 𝗘LDRUM, not too far from Cootehill, would carry unwanted babies in a creel to the Black Lake and proceed to throw them into the depths of the loch, which not very pleasant. And thereby that would add credence to what Tom McIntyre's assertion that the lakes of Cavan are haunted. A further reference to death at 𝗏𝗵𝗲 is noted in Dara Smith's book, A Guide to Celtic Mythology, where he states that in ancient times 𝗏𝗵𝗲 was called 𝗊𝗏𝗵𝗲 in reference to its position as at the confluence of the Blackwater tributary and the Boyne. And there was a curse said to have been associated with the hill until the 19th century, and it may have attributed to the death of 𝗘𝘀𝘁 the king of Tara, who was slain at 𝗘𝘀𝗵𝗲 by his grandsons, the three 𝗘LLAs. Another theory is that the Corleck head may have been a representation of the three gods of craftsmanship. They were 𝗏𝗲 the smith, 𝗬𝗃 the wright, and 𝗘DNCR the soft metal worker. And significantly, this would suggest that there's a link between pre-Christian Bridget and East Cavan. Bridget was the goddess daughter of the 𝗘𝗀𝗲, chief god of the 𝗃 𝗀𝗲. And in mythology, Bridget is recorded as having been mother of the aforementioned three gods of craftsmanship. In addition, during ancient times, a Bridget head and shoulders idol carved from stone was worshipped as a triple deity in East Knockbride. But when Christianity arrived in Ireland, the Bridget sculpture was hidden in a dolmen until the 19th century. When it was retrieved, it was erected on the local church, where it was popularly known as St. Breed of Knockbride. However, around 1848, the local priest removed the Bridget stone and took it away in a gig. He was going to have it placed on his own church in West Knockbride, but it was said that the stone eloped the cart and hasn't been seen since. The stone wasn't for moving, it seems. And this is another interpretation of the Corleck head with the Bridget stone above it, and the 𝗀𝗵𝗲 idol beneath it. It's drawn by Bill Richards, and it's placed over what is described as a temple door. This is an imaginative interpretation. And there are also other heads represented. There's also, I don't know if you can see, there's a small little head, which was the 𝗀𝗃 head, and it had large eyes and a benign smiling face. And then there was a little horse believed to have been a representation of 𝗃𝗀𝗃, or 𝗃𝗃 𝗏𝗃. And that's that there.
Are some of these missing now?
Yes, I think the 𝗀𝗃 head is in the museum, but the little horse, that's missing. Tom Barron, I said he had a stone horse in his house as a child. That went missing.
The 𝗀𝗃𝗵𝗲 structure, does that refer to the faces facing the opposite way as Seamus?
Yes, yeah, yes. So I suppose until conclusive evidence is unearthed, it would be impossible to draw a definite conclusion as to what the Corleck head and the associated deities may truly mean. So for anyone, as I think Fiona mentioned, that there is a replica in the museum, and it's well worth going to see, so that if you're not, or if you're in Dublin, call into the National Museum. Now, this is an image of at 𝗃𝗀𝗃, the Druidic sort of site, and I may have to just go over to actually go to read it here. This is on this side is there's the tomb, the portal tomb, where various objects were hidden, which is under A, which is over this end. There's a Corbel temple, which were associated with the three gods of craftsmanship, the 𝗂𝗃 enclosure, and the sort of a tomb. And there's the pillar, which is a phallic symbol with the Corleck head above it. And it's said to, the water is said to, it's a symbol of the Great Mother Earth, and mating with the symbol of the 𝗘𝗀𝗃. That's what that is. And we're just returning to this image again, and the 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 head on the end here, with the face and the beard and the hole in the ears. We'll just see what that's about in a moment now. Dr. Anne Ross, she was an expert in the field of Celtic studies and the author of The Pagan Celts. She described the rammed horned idol as being a representation of both war and fertility in Celtic mythology. The ram, although a less significant god, was also worshipped in both Africa and Egyptian cultures. The smiling bearded head, as we said, referred to as the 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 head, may be, as Tom Barron suggested, connected to the god called Cernunnos. Cernunnos was an ancient god of the Celts, of whom Conall Carnoch was possibly an incarnation. Conall Carnoch is said to have been buried at Ballyheedy near Maeshlacht in West Cavan. He was a hero god of the Ernai people, and they were said to have been one the same as the 𝗊𝗏 𝗔𝘀𝗽𝗲𝗰, who were descendants of the 𝗲𝗏𝗵𝗻𝗃 race who abandoned Ireland, whose later descendants returned, having first settled in Greece, came back to Ireland as the 𝗊𝗏𝗏. This is an image of the god Cernunnos. The god Cernunnos bore antler horns, and he was considered to have been a protector of nature and a master hunter. To the Druids, he was the god of the underworld and the astral plane. And the 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 head at the small hole, possibly you could put it like a small branch or something into the hole, would look like an antler. He's the continental Celtic lord of animals, and his name meant the horned one. Cernunnos was one of the major gods which the Celts worshipped, and representations of him can be found right throughout Europe. And there's another hypothesis which says that the two-headed Dschaannaform with the 𝗘𝘀𝗁𝗃 head on one side and the ram's head to the other may have actually been a representation of 𝗵𝗏 or Fatnik, which can invariably be a two-headed or three-headed god or deity of the Mogdornai tribe. The Mogdornai are associated with the barony of Cremorne in County Monaghan. He was called Fatnik because it says idol. It had to be thick enough to hold the various heads. It could hold up to 3 heads. However, in Cavan, an ancient name for Loch Ramor at Virginia was Loch 𝗵𝗏. Therefore, it's feasible that the Mogdornai had occupied the territory of East Cavan. Other than its association with 𝗵𝗏, Loch Ramor is also said to contain the fabled serpent of fights, who's said to have surpassed all the fights of the world. Of course, there are, I suppose, many more aspects to East Cavan's antiquity, for which we'd need, I think, several talks to go through everything. But I have it in mind, for the last number of years, I've been putting together unwritten works by Tom Barron and sifting through those in the hope that maybe at some point to do something with them. So maybe welcome you back for that. So just to conclude, I'm going to read a poem by Seamus Heaney, which I think is quite apt. It's called January God, and I'll just read that now, just before we conclude. Then I found a two-faced stone on burial ground, God-eyed, sex-mouthed, its brain a watery wound. In the wet gap of the year, daubed with fresh lake mud, I faltered near his power, January God. January God, who broke the water, the hymen with its great antlers. There rained upon each ghost tine his familiars, the mothering earth, the stones taken by each wave, the fleshly aftergrass, the bones subsoil in each grave. Thank you.